From the writing of the book to the marketing of the book, I think there's two pieces of advice. Play your own game and build your team. Don't go it alone.
My name is Bethany Saltman, and I am an author and a best-selling book coach.
And I'm Fran Hauser. I'm an author, a keynote speaker, and a publishing strategist. These How I Did It conversations will inspire listeners to claim their own authority mindset and turn the story they can't stop telling into a book the world needs to read.
This is Bookbound, the podcast, created in partnership with Share Your Genius. Elaine Lin Hering is an executive leadership consultant, facilitator, speaker, and writer. She works with organizations and individuals to build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict management. This conversation with Elaine about her USA Today best-selling book, Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully, is a masterclass in how to get published and stay true to yourself. She talks about what it means to play your own game and the long game instead of listening to all the voices in your ear. She talks about finding your own voice on the page, which only happens if you're willing to experiment, and the importance of building a team for your bookbound journey. You're in for a treat. Hey, Elaine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'd like to begin every interview with a similar kind of a question, which is basically, how did you know that this Unlearning Silence was a book?
It's a great question. At the time, I was a partner at a global leadership development firm, and my business partners had written books on difficult conversations and feedback. And so from a business perspective, we were looking for the next book. As I thought about the issue, and this process started in 2015 and it came out in 2024. So just over the course of 9 years, when you start thinking about something a lot and you tease out a lot of the nuances and you write articles on it, and there's still more to say after the article, you start to think, oh, this might be a book.
I love it. That's great. And I love that you brought our attention to the fact that this can take a long time.
Oh my God. It was so long, so long, as you both know, right? And the gestation period and at least for me, and I've heard from plenty of other authors, the self-doubt. Who am I to write a book? Can I really write a book? This is by far the longest thing I have ever written. And, it's not 800 words of an article or a blog post or a fill in the blank. And so it really was breaking down, this is 10 chapters, presumably, by the time we sketched it out. That is 30 10-page term papers strung together that all have to talk to each other and have an arc.
Love it.
I think I can do that. I've written 10 term papers in my lifetime. And that mindset really helped it feel much more doable, but both in terms of length of time, of gestation period, and then, I don't know, I'm not a medical doctor and I don't remember pregnancy or I've blocked it out. So it's, there's lots of growing eyeballs or the book equivalent.
Amazing. That's so interesting. So you said to yourself, I think this is a book. And then what did you do?
I tried to talk myself out of it. I had a 18-month-old, I think, at the time that I got serious about the book. And the one thing I would say is I do not recommend stacking deep work like writing a book with raising a young child who has night terrors and does not sleep. It is just fundamentally incompatible, would not wish it on anyone. And at the same time, around 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, I was at home breastfeeding thinking, this book should have been out already. And then there was a pressure that I put on myself of, I got to get it done. So then I bought what seems like the prerequisite book titled How to Write a Book Proposal off Amazon, found it utterly unhelpful, spun and spiraled for about 6 months, trying to follow the prescriptive advice in there. So then went down a rabbit hole to research and then thought, you know what? There are people who actually write book proposals for a living, who know them, people who know books, right? I am an expert in my content. I am not an expert in writing a book proposal, and maybe I'll never have to do it again, or writing a book even. And so then started the process of building a team of what expertise do I have, who can come alongside me to help shape this project. And also there was some validation in it where someone who seemed to know what they were doing in publishing actually thought that this idea had legs, rather than my continuing to think, I don't know, let's give it a shot.
Yeah, that's such a theme. We've been hearing that a lot, right, Fran? Uh, People that have an idea and then they reach out to someone who's an expert in the field and they say, this idea has legs. And sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because when we think about writing, when we picture the writing process, we picture a very solitary kind of, like I'm sitting on my computer and I'm doing my writing. And when you're talking about a nonfiction book, it's so smart to have that awareness of, okay, what am I an expert in and what am I not an expert in? And how do I build a team? How do I build a team of people that are going to support me, whether it's in writing the proposal, whether it's development editing, or even like down the road, maybe it's a social media person to help me with the marketing. So I love this idea, Elaine, that you saw that very early on. And how amazing that you're randomly like on LinkedIn and you see this ad.
And it was such a calculated decision of, look, the fees, I could make that up by teaching 10 in-person workshops. And that's something that feels doable to me right now. And it really was one of the first times I can remember in my life of me betting on myself, because I grew up in such a DIY culture, right? You can Google it, you can figure it out. I could, maybe, but not really. And also, Fran, when you're talking about building a team, I get a lot of questions of, do you really need a literary agent? And I remember when we were shopping the book, my agent and I were shopping the book, and I mean, she's just a wealth of information. People are in the profession for a reason with expertise that I simply do not have 15, 20 years in publishing to understand the ins and outs, much less the percentages, much less what comes next, much less strategy. And I remember thinking when my agent was handling we had a couple of preempts. I was like, Google, right? What is a preempt? Just thinking this 15% commission that is going to her is the best delegation ever.
Absolutely. Can you tell our listeners what a preempt is? And then tell us how you found your agent.
So let me answer that second question first. So Megan Stevenson's process was, after we work on a book proposal, if she thinks that it continues to think that it has legs, continues to think that you are someone, I mean, the word that we used was not crazy. And I think there's a more politically correct way of putting that. But there's sort of a screening process that, coming from publishing, she has a spreadsheet of agents. And so she introduced me to a handful. We met and I went with Rachel Ekstrom Courage, who I thought, she seems to really get the topic. And just wanted someone who really got it deeply. And then the preempt is, as I came to understand it, and you all can define it better, I'm sure, if there are multiple publishers interested, where there were in this case, a imprint publisher will come and make you an offer, presumably a large sum of money, to try to take the project off the table so that you will secure the publisher and then no one else can bid on it. And so I was still very much of the mindset of, let's give traditional publishing a go. I lose very little. I probably take some Zoom meetings and it's a little bit of my time. And if traditional publishing doesn't pan out, then I can look at self-publishing or hybrid publishing. But given how I wanted the book to be positioned, really wanted to give it a shot. So Rachel went out on submission with the proposal, started getting these calendar invites. And I was like, Rachel, what are these? She's like, if publishers are interested, they'll meet with you, sort of kick the tires, make sure you actually understand what you're talking about, see how open you are to feedback. So we had a couple of those meetings, and then the tone of the meeting started to change, where Portfolio, an imprint at the business imprint at Penguin, actually came back like with a pitch deck to me saying, we'd love to publish you. Here's how we would market it. And again, utter confusion on my part. What's going on? And then the preempt was an offer coming in saying, hey, we'd love to publish and here's the money behind it. And Rachel very wisely said, I think we should decline it. To which I said, I think you're right. It's really hard to walk away from a six-figure sum of money. And yet strategically, it seems like the right thing to do since there are, at least 10 more calls that we have scheduled with other publishers. So we met with 16 publishers and then ended up running a 2-day auction where publishers come and make their best offer. And then day 2 is here's the base and then come back with your best and final. We're 2 years out now. I'm not sure I fully processed it at all. It all just happened. And then it was, oh, shoot, I'm under a deadline, which I've come to write the thing. And I've come to realize all of that is negotiable, right? Life happens. People understand that. Editors understand that. But given that I already felt like this book should have been out 2 to 5 years before we even pitched it, it was all right, December 16th, I lose childcare for the year. Let's get this first draft to them. So we were off to the races.
Well, and that's the thing with the agent. Like, it's not only helping you package and position the book so that publishers get excited about it, but then it's also all the negotiating. And by the way, I believe, if I remember correctly, that you're an expert in negotiating.
Yeah, but not in publishing. I don't know what the standards are in publishing. Also, I think there's a precursor, Fran, of not even the negotiating, but even which editors to pitch the project to.
The Rolodex.
The Rolodex that I, as a layperson, can only figure out so much from by what's on someone's webpage. Versus Rachel's like, oh, I think that person's about to go out on parental leave. So then it would sit in their inbox. Or, there's so much in the ecosystem that I am a firm believer that nothing is a solo sport. And writing, publishing a book certainly is a team sport.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations. That is just a very exciting, thrilling ride that you've been on.
Yes. and that was just to sell the book, right? Then we had to write the thing.
Yeah. So talk to us about that. So the book is so good. It's so rich. When we work with students, we talk a lot about organizing principle and, how to build that framework. And you've done such an amazing job here. It's a 2-part structure, 2 acts, if you will. How did you come up with that? And then I also really would love to know how you developed the work, specifically the examples and the reflective exercises. I'm really curious.
I was under the mindset, given the books that my business partners had written, that other people in the community had written, that you have to have a 3-part framework. Or as Kim Scott and others would say, you need a 2x2, right? The McKinsey approach. And this concept would just not fit into a 2x2 or 3-part framework, or my brain doesn't work that way. And that's part of why I was spinning, because I had absorbed all this well-intentioned advice that the internet and other people have, and it didn't work for me. And Megan said, you could have 2 parts. We could have awareness and action. I was like, well, that makes sense. So let's do that. And the exercises and the stories are very much reflective of how I teach. So my own background is in leadership development, have done more than a decade of facilitating workshops, and the storytelling, the relatability, a lot of that is how I teach, as well as small group reflection. And so wanted to bake that into the book to make it user-friendly. If you're picking it up just for yourself or reading it with a book club, with your team, that we give you some meat to work with alongside the reader's guides that I have on my website. But the other piece that I really struggled with is this a business book or is this a wellness book? Where on the bookshelves is it going to sit? And this started as a business book because that's the world I come from in corporate education and leadership development. And I always knew it would cross over. But one of the reasons that I went with Penguin Life, whose brand is one big idea to change the world or change lives, is because the more we talked about it in these different meetings, it really struck me that you cannot be well if you are silenced or if you feel like you have to be silent. And so I thought, you know what, let publishers or bookstores or whoever it is who decides, I don't even know, figure out whether it's going to sit in the business section of a bookstore or psychology section or a fill in the blank. And in different bookstores, it sits in different places. The BISAC codes, which label what categories, are a combination of leadership, psychology, some other things. Again, it was really letting go of the things that are not my expertise or purview and letting others make those calls. And, I have the UK version here. The UK subtitle actually ends with "Lead with Courage," whereas the US version is "How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully," which we are really positioning more around wellness. UK wanted to go with "Lead with Courage." I said, look, I trust you know the market better. And the contents of the book are exactly the same, other than adding some U's, right, in behavior or the UK spelling. The other thing, though, that I really thought about in writing the book is the emotional arc. And again, that is reflective of how I teach, particularly, and how I speak, particularly with a topic as that can be as potentially heavy as silence, needing to give the reader some relief. So alongside talking about harassment and inequity and bias, also weaving in Top Chef and Queer Eye and the Golden State Warriors, right? And we talk about my debate with my husband over how to clean the toilet, as well as mother-daughter dynamics, as well as workplace dynamics. I mean, it's all intertwined and reinforces how we've learned or potentially can unlearn silence. But that was a real wrestling point of, is this a wellness book? If it's a business book, I'm supposed to tell these types of stories or supposed to have these. I mean, there's so much should. And then really thinking, how do I write the book that I think I need or that people like me need, rather than trying to mimic more of what's already out on the market, which is already so skewed in terms of leadership books toward white male authors.
Hey, Bookbound ones. If you're loving this interview as much as we are, we think you'll want to join us for this very special, first of its kind, Read Like a Writer book club. What the heck is a Read Like a Writer book club? I'm so glad you asked. This idea came to us after working with so many aspiring authors who are still reading books like a reader, liking this, not liking that, instead of studying successful books for lessons in how to weave their own stories into clear structures or develop frameworks that really change people's lives. And we thought, hey, why leave so much learning on the table? Then we realized that we have this incredible archive of author interviews. Yes, this very podcast. And so we put it all together and said, hey, let's host a Read Like a Writer book club. This is how it works. For the low price of $175, we'll meet once a month over Zoom for 7 months. Our meetings will take place on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time. We'll give you a list of books, related podcast episodes to review, and a simple reading guide. We'll meet up and discuss together and in small groups. Fran and I are so excited to get started. We love reading, we love you guys, and we love studying books with other women. Sign up at bookboundpodcast.com/club. We can't wait to see you there.
Bethany and I talk a lot about who is your muse, when you're writing the book. And that would look very differently if it's a business book or if it's a wellness book, clearly, right? So it sounded like what I heard you say is, I wanted to write the book that I would want out in the world, that I would want for myself. Were you your own muse, or was there another reader that you had in mind when you were writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, I and someone like me was very much my muse. And that's another sort of two-part analysis, which is this a book that is just focused on people who have been silenced and struggle with speaking up? Or is it also a book for people who silence others, leaders, managers? Are those two separate books? Can they really fit within the same book? I mean, there's so much wrestling. And so I landed on, we as human beings, we may have learned silence, And if we're human, we also silence other people. And so they go hand in hand. But that was another piece of when I'm thinking about the reader, there's sort of two readers, right? The first reader I'm thinking about is people like me who have been silenced, who have been told to make yourself small, who it leads to self-doubt. And a lot of people say, I wrote the book that I needed when I was younger. I say, I wrote the book that I still need, because the silence we've learned goes so deep, and the people and the systems around us continue to silence us based on gender, race, class, education, ability, any of the above. So I still need it, and I'm still learning. It wasn't until the book sold and then the book came out that I really started to believe that I actually had a voice.
Yes. And so I'd love to hear you talk about finding your voice on the page. I love the story you tell about the master chef, and people telling people cook your own food. I love that. And we talk about that with people all the time. You're going to find your authority when you write the book that only you could write. And so talk to us a little bit about that process of finding your voice on the page.
It really messes with your mind to write a book on unlearning silence while unlearning your own silence. I think any book turns you inside out. And this meta process and all I was navigating while writing it really just felt next level. But I think there really is how do you block out all the shoulds? It's got to be a 3-part framework. It's supposed to sound like this, the 2x2. And I believe it's Anne Lamott who says, write the shitty first draft. And as much respect as I have, I actually refused to call my first draft shitty because I didn't want to judge it in that way. It was hard enough for me to believe there was something valuable at all. So I started calling out the get it out draft. Just get it out. And then I could clean it up. And there's something about just doing and experimenting that at least gives you something to work with. And the get it out then is like clay that can be molded and shaped and refined. But until you sort of put it out there, even for yourself or anyone you're writing with to see, there's no clay to work with. And I found that mindset really liberating. Also, in parallel, I was posting on LinkedIn just some of the ideas, and it was resonating with people. I already knew that it had legs from working with clients, talking with people about it, coaching around these ideas, but to see random strangers who I don't even know engaging with the content, having aha moments, that you can't do this in isolation. So there's that feedback loop that really fuels you. It wasn't until I signed off on the final draft, actually, post copy edits, I was doing the final review, that I sent my editor a note saying, I think I can write. And she was like, well, yeah, obviously you can. But it took me that long to say, okay, I've literally written the book. I've written the manuscript, written the book. Other people think it's good. It makes sense. It's coherent. And then I'm reading it just as a reader rather than the author. Maybe that's the distinction, right? I'm just picking it up and reading it as a reader, and it resonates. You can't find your voice unless you do something. So there's an act of experimentation and action and massaging it. It wasn't until I read it as a book, I was like, oh, I guess my voice is research-backed, because as a woman, particularly as an Asian American woman, there's a double standard. So I can't just say stuff. It's got to be research-backed. It is paying attention to the emotional arc. It is talking about things that are relatable, and also talks about Top Chef and Queer Eye. Apparently that's my voice, and I didn't know that until I did it.
I love the idea too of reading the book as a reader. Like, especially if you can give yourself some space, after you finish writing, and then just give yourself a little bit of time and distance from the book, and then come back to it and read it as a reader. And that's when it's so truly. And I literally had the same experience where I did that and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, this is good. I'm happy with it. So, question on the title, Unlearning Silence. Was that always the title, or did that change throughout the process?
Yeah, I think I'm actually quite unique in that regard, because that was always the title. That was the concept. That was the key idea. That was the big idea. We pitched it as Unlearning Silence, subtitle TBD, and it stuck. The subtitle we wordsmithed for far longer than I ever want to do again, but also seems really typical.
Well, it is, because the subtitle with a prescriptive nonfiction, the subtitle really needs to clearly articulate what the reader value proposition is, right? But I think you did it so beautifully. So this is the subtitle. You mentioned it before, but it's How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully, which is very clear. It's very specific.
Thank you. And this is, again, as an author, it's like when you cook your own food. Maybe you're more critical of the food that you've cooked than you would be of anyone else. I still see the potential downfalls in it, right? When I see unleash talent, I'm like, well, that's the nod to the leader unleashing someone else's talent. Live more fully, some people think is too squishy of a phrase, but we really didn't want to have another book that said thrive. And so it also was really liberating to say, look, this book is a point in time. I'm not going to get everything right. I may evolve my thinking over time, but the purpose of this book is to catalyze a conversation in society more broadly, in our workplaces, in our relationships around silence, much like we talk much more about shame after Brene Brown's TED Talk.
Yeah.
I want us to talk about silence, and it's a jumping off point for all that conversation. And that really took the pressure off to make it perfect, because it is still the product of a human being who is imperfect.
So talk to us about the marketing of the book and how you got the word out, how you see that, because we like to think about platform and PR as really two sides of the same coin. What's the relationship between your platform, what you started with, and then how you got the word out?
Yeah, I'm smiling only because when my agent and I sold the book, I had precisely 1,192 followers on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn was the only social platform that I was on. And I share that sort of with a chuckle because I'm embarrassed of it. Some well-intentioned people had given me advice a long time ago that if your content is good enough, you don't need to be on social media. And I actually listened to that advice. And that is advice that I wish I had not listened to, wish that I had interrogated. And again, would encourage any listener to interrogate the advice that you're getting. Does it make sense for you? Does it resonate? What might be the pitfalls of that advice? I wish I had engaged with LinkedIn much earlier. So my platform at the time that we sold the book, I would say, was quite small. If we just think about social media, where the strength of my platform came from was being in leadership development, having a book of clients who we were already selling the workshop to. And the proposition was every workshop we sell, every participant gets a copy of the book, and that drives book sales. But I spent a lot of my career, the majority of my career, building someone else's platform, building someone else's brand. And this idea of Elaine Lin Hering or Unlearning Silence as its own identity or brand or platform, fill in the blank language around it, was new to me. And also hard, coming from a collective culture where having a servant heart, putting others before you, considering others before yourself, not boasting. Marketing is hard. It feels like, are people sick of hearing about me? I might be sick of talking about me. Am I taking up too much space? Okay, apparently 10% of your followers, if that, see any one post. So maybe I'm not being repetitive. All these things. So when it came to marketing the book, again, building a team and trying to figure out, the publisher has a team. I'm hearing all these perspectives about what they might do or not do. And I chose to hire outside PR. I worked with Cave Henricks, who are phenomenal in launching business books. Again, looking for expertise that matched the type of book and the genre I was in. as a little bit of a safety net in case the publisher didn't show up as they had said they would. And of course, Penguin Life did a phenomenal job. And Cave Henricks, I think they worked seamlessly hand in hand together to look at podcasts, to look at traditional print, to look at, McKinsey Author Talks, all these different avenues. Where do we want this idea to be showing up? And where can we plant seeds? So to me, we're still in very early stages. In the next 3 to 5 years, I'd love to see the concept and the book embedded in leadership development programs, because so much as we want people to speak up, you also need leaders and managers who unlearn the ways they silence the people they lead. And particularly white men, I would be pleasantly surprised if they were to be quick to pick up the book, but I'm not betting on it. Versus every advanced leadership program in a corporation says, you've got to read this, you've got to engage with the concepts. I think that's how we're going to get that population to change, which goes back to who's the reader, who's the muse. And one reader population was people like me who have been silenced. I wanted people to feel seen, known, and heard, right? To know that it wasn't them, it wasn't their fault, they weren't the ones who were crazy. There's this thing called silence. And then the other demographic is well-intentioned leaders who really want to lead in a way that unleashes the talent on their team, that brings out the best in the people that they lead. And there are parts of the book where I'm inviting those well-intentioned leaders to eavesdrop and to listen in. And then there are parts of the book where I'm saying, okay, leaders, this is your call to action. So there's just a lot of dancing that happens, but thinking about the marketing as, okay, who are the different populations? Where do they hang out? Therefore, where do I need to show up? Where can we plant seeds to continue to play the long game? Because this is about behavior change, and behavior change is not quick. So let's plant seeds and cultivate them over time.
And that's such a healthy mindset. This idea of the long game versus really focusing on pre-orders and like those first few weeks and getting the sales numbers so that you can make the bestseller list. And first of all, it's so unhealthy. It's so stressful versus approaching it with this type of long game mindset, which is, what this book is going to be. It's going to be out for a while, right? It's going to be making an impact for a while. And I just love, Elaine, that you brought that up, because I think it's really important for anyone who's listening, who's working on a book, because there is this crazy amount of pressure on that launch period.
And I want to be clear that maybe I sound slightly more zen now than I did 3 months ago, but I got caught up in it as well, as much as I was trying to resist. Everything is... I had friends texting me saying, well, you're not on the list, the New York Times list this week. And I was like, can you please not, if you want to talk with each other, if you want to deal with the gamesmanship of whether I'm a top release in Amazon or this or that, talk with each other. Do not talk with me. Like, I need the cone of silence. And it did hit, Amazon top release for a while. It was number 1 and number 3 in the category. It did hit the USA Today bestseller list, which I'm really grateful for. And as someone who's now a solopreneur, first-time author, woman of color, all those things, it's such a weird dance to really try to not play into the system, but also realize that you are part of the system, that when someone sees national bestseller or USA Today bestseller, that signals something. So as much as I didn't want to play into it, I also knew it. And finding what is healthy. My editor gave me really good advice to say, don't read reviews on Amazon and Goodreads. Those are for readers, not for authors.
So good.
I'm so grateful. I resisted the urge to read them for about 3 weeks. And then one late night, I went down the rabbit hole. Again, I'm human, so I just want listeners to know I'm also human, and it's okay, because then you can choose what boundaries you want. Some person, I'm salty about it, gave me a 1-star review on Goodreads, which totally messed with the average, didn't leave any words. And I'm just like, and then needing to let it go. And also Deepa Purushothaman giving me really good advice of define success for yourself. Because the market, the industry, other people, sales numbers are one metric of success, but I ended up, again, experimenting with a definition of success, which was moving through the world with kindness and grace for myself and for the people I encounter. Oh, and staying sane. I think that was the first part.
Yeah.
Those were all things I could control versus I couldn't control whether the New York Times is an editorial list, right? It's not even, so all these things, there's so many pieces that the layperson doesn't know, or even well-intentioned friends who are excited about the gamesmanship of it and figuring out what is success for yourself and what is going to be healthy for you.
Oh gosh, I think we need to wrap there. That's just perfect. Honestly, I was going to ask you what advice would you give, but you did.
Yeah. I mean, from the writing of the book to the marketing of the book, play your own game. Know why you're going down this path, who you're looking to reach, what impact you're looking to drive, and play that game, because there's so many shoulds, so many opinions, so much misinformation. So I think there's two pieces of advice. Play your own game and build your team. Don't go it alone.
Beautiful. We're so grateful. Elaine, you're amazing. We love you.
Yes, this was amazing. Our listeners are going to be this is perfect.
So tell us, where can everyone find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I am at ElaineLinHering.com or Elaine Lin Hering on LinkedIn. Basically every weekday. There's also an option to sign up for a free monthly newsletter with tips on how to use your voice and build cultures of voice. Would love to connect.
Yes. Well, I'm definitely going to start following you if I'm not already. I love it. You're the best. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Bookbound.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
Please visit us at bookboundpodcast.com for more on us and how we work with authors.